Hello and welcome to Mindful Money. I'm John Lappin and today we're talking to Philip Smith, a workplace pensions expert with Buck Consultants. Now we're taking the point of view of a smaller employer and asking Philip questions about what a smaller employer should be doing to meet the regulations for the new workplace pension reforms. Hello Philip.
Hello John.
Now Philip, if I'm a smaller employer and I haven't done much about complying with the new workplace pension reforms, what should I be doing now? What would be the priorities?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is make sure that you've got your letter from the pensions regulator telling you what your staging date is. So that is the date that you have to comply with your new duties. So the pensions regulator has sent out a letter to every employer in the UK, and that tells you the date that you need to comply. So that would be the first thing I would do. If I hadn't got that letter, then contact the pensions regulator and talk to them about that. If you have got the letter and you know when your staging date is, then 6 months out, start thinking about it. Start thinking about the things that you're going to need to do to comply, budgeting, payroll issues, all of those kind of things. Start really start a good project plan to get your project underway.
So, if a smaller employer has an existing pension scheme and plan in operation already, how easy is it to adapt that for the new regulations?
Well, it could be very easy. It may be that there's very little change required at all. Much will depend upon the contribution rates. Obviously, you'll need to look at things like charges. Is the plan competitive? There's an awful lot of talk about the level of charges in workplace pensions at the moment. So all of those kind of things you'd need to think about. You'll also need to talk to your provider, because not all providers are necessarily happy to accept auto-enrolment employees into their schemes. So you'll need to engage with your provider to make sure that they're happy with your plans.
Okay, and so having touched on providers, is there a reasonable choice? Will an employer be able to go, well, I might put it with this company, or I might go perhaps with the government scheme NEST? What's the choice like at the moment?
Well, there's a reasonable choice out there. Most of the, let's call them the commercial providers, will offer you terms for a workplace pension, but a lot will depend upon the actual level of contribution that you're going to put into the plan. So broadly, the higher the level of contribution you pay in for your employees, the more competitive the charges are going to be. NEST has a public service obligation, so if you can't find a provider that will take you, or indeed you can't find one on competitive terms, then NEST could be a very good home for you.
Now, an important part of this reform is obviously payroll and managing payroll and how that fits with the pension. How much of a challenge is that?
I think that could be one of the biggest challenges that people face, the services provided by their payroll provider. One of the key tasks you need to do as you move through the auto-enrolment journey is to what is called assess your workforce. So look at your workforce and see who you actually have to auto-enroll. That decides a lot of things, like the type of communications you have to send to people and the level of contributions. So a lot of payroll providers have that capability built into their systems. Some don't. So again, engage early, talk to your payroll provider and see if they're going to be able to help you with this workforce assessment task that you've got to do.
Now, ultimately a pension is invested somewhere and it gets returns, and then that's how people build up a pot of money. There's talk obviously about a default fund. Can you explain exactly what a default fund is in terms of this reform? And also, should an employer be providing some sort of investment guidance to their employees as well as part of this reform?
Because you are auto-enrolling your employees into the plan, you're not asking them if they want to join or indeed make any choice. You are literally putting them into the plan without their permission. You will have to choose, the regulations require that you choose a default investment fund in which their contributions get invested when they join the plan. Now the employee, once they're in the plan, may choose to do something completely different if there are other options available. But for the vast majority of employers, something like 90% of employees will end up staying in the default investment fund. So choosing that investment fund is quite an important job for the employer to make sure it's suitable for its workforce. And indeed, that's one of the one of the things that the DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, is very keen on, is that the default investment choice reflects the type of workforce that the employer has. In terms of advice to employees, well, I think that's an area that employers should steer clear of. It's not required, and if you're thinking about getting advice for your employees, then you really need to get an investment professional who's authorised to give advice to get involved.
Now, if you look at the whole pension and auto-enrolment process, it's quite possible that an employer might be looking to outside help in lots of different areas. So there could be, obviously the accountant may be involved, there may be a financial advisor or a benefits consultant, there may be a payroll company as well. So if you have outsourced or sought help from all these different places, they all have to come together and make this sort of fit this jigsaw puzzle together. But how do you make sure they're working together efficiently?
Well, what we've done at Buck Consultants when we've engaged with our clients is to get a working party agreed at the employer with clear responsibilities for who is going to manage the project and exactly what they're going to do. So appoint a project manager, appoint a single person who's going to be responsible for delivering this. That may be with one of your outside providers, at your benefit consultant, for example, or your accountant, or it could be, if you've got internal resource, that you appoint somebody from your HR or finance function, typically, to run the project and pull all your different providers together.
There have been some changes, certainly in the way consultants and advisors can be paid. So, for example, a pension provider doesn't pay a commission anymore to an advisor or a consultant. And also there was a new sort of charging called consultancy charging, and that isn't allowed anymore either. The pension minister, Steve Webb, changed his mind about that. But what does that mean for how employers pay for that advice now? What should they be thinking of, and what do they have to pay attention to?
Well, as you say, in the past it was possible for employers to effectively subsidise the cost of advice via the charges from their workplace pension schemes. That is now no longer possible, and so I think you need to, as an employer, you need to think very carefully about the type of advice that you're going to need, because you will need to pay an explicit charge for that. So you need to budget for that advice, and that may be choice with things like choosing your pension provider. Is your pension provider suitable? It may be help with things like the default investment fund that we just spoke about. How do you choose your default investment fund? So those are the kind of things that employers need to think about and budget for as they move through auto-enrolment, if they are going to take advice.
Finally, if an employer doesn't quite get things done on time, or if an employer does some things wrong, so it doesn't quite meet the regulations and what it's supposed to do, what are the implications?
Well, ultimately the implications are a fine from the pensions regulator and all the kind of bad publicity that goes along with that. It's interesting that even among some of the large employers, that the pensions regulator is currently undertaking some kind of investigations to check compliance. So I think the implication of that is that even large employers might not get it quite right. But as we move into smaller employers, I think there's going to be a degree of understanding about the challenges that people face in terms of complying. And as long as you're making your best efforts to comply, I think you'll find some degree of leniency there. But you do need to be careful, and really the message is make sure you plan properly and you comply.
Thank you, Philip, for talking to us today.
Thank you.